It is indeed a great blessing to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for attending and participating in our ISNA Green Initiatives webinar today. I'm your brother, Safet Kadovic. I serve as the director of ISNA's Office for Interfaith and Community Relations and Government Relations in Washington, D.C. We have a wonderful panel here today, and we're exploring opportunities by which you, as members of communities belonging to various nonprofit institutions within the Muslim community, both schools, mosques, and other institutions, may be able to find ways in which you can access some of important grant funding that will help you to be able to better serve your community that you are a part of and the larger community as a whole. I'd like to take this opportunity to take a brief moment in silent remembrance for the victims of various climate disasters and extreme weather events taking place around the world. Most recently, the shocking events of the tragedy as a result of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. So we take a minute sort of to ground ourselves in a moment of peaceful reflection and memory of those who have passed on in many other parts of the world where the realities of climate change are harming, in real terms, the real lives of real people, members of our human family. Thank you for that. From a Muslim tradition, the importance, and by no means is this unique, it's shared with the other Abrahamic traditions as well as with spiritual communities and spiritual traditions around the world. Care for the environment, the natural world, is a responsibility for we as human beings. It is a trust, it is a sacred trust to have good stewardship over the land. Human negative intervention, anthropocenic, as it is said, intervention into the natural world in a negative way has resulted in this climate change, which is increasing the frequency and intensity, amongst other things, of earthquakes. Each and every one of us can make a difference by changing and altering the way in which we interact with Mother Earth, making lifestyle choices and changes in our behavior. But that is not sufficient. The importance of governmental responsibility, as outlined by the first of its kind international agreement known as the Paris Agreement, the Climate Accords as they're more generally referred to, in which the nations of the world, including our nation here, the United States of America, have committed to work on ways in which we can walk back from the brink, in which we can reduce global greenhouse gas emissions and our climate impact and reduce our carbon footprint. This past year, there was a struggle in Congress by many folks and many organizations to work to put together initially what was called the Build Back Better bill, but eventually became transformed into the Inflation Reduction Act, which invests the largest amount in the history of America in programs specifically to incentivize transition to green economy and to an environmentally conscious and environmentally conscious policy that seeks to preserve this place that we call home, Mother Earth, for our generations to come. One of the federal funding programs and opportunities that has come about as a result and is included within the Inflation Reduction Act is what is referred to as the DOE pilot project. We're fortunate today to explore this federal funding opportunity for nonprofits, small nonprofits, and this includes our masjids, our mosques, and Islamic schools. We're joined by a wonderful panel of distinguished experts in this area, and specifically to speak about this program and ways in which we can access it It is not only a right, it is a responsibility as citizens of this nation who pay taxes to access these programs, which will provide us opportunities to continue the good work and the multifaceted work that many small nonprofits engage in terms of community service, social services, social justice issues, by allowing us to reduce costs of energy consumption and to able to then reallocate some of those funds towards other programs and projects which we are involved in our communities. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Dan Brissett, who is the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, EESI, an organization that is uniquely positioned in that it speaks to both sides of the aisle. And I'll let him talk about that a little bit, in providing critical information where these decisions are being made at the governmental level, and then sharing that important information with we, the citizens of this nation, members of our religious and other communities, spiritual communities, and in how we can best access those opportunities provided for in the legislation. Mr. Dan Brissett, welcome.
Thank you so much. That was a very nice introduction, and it's very nice to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation to make a short presentation today about energy efficiency and all the great stuff that will soon become available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. So I hope everyone can see my screen. I've got a few slides here, and we'll be happy to make these available as well. At the outset, while I got the nice introduction, I'm not the only person at ESI who works on these issues, and so my colleagues Miguel Yanez Barnuevo and Molly Brindamore deserve a big shout out for helping us keep track of all of this great stuff. And our contact information is at the end of the slides as well. So ESI, as you heard, is based in Washington, D.C. We are a small nonprofit that is focused primarily on policymaker education, with an emphasis on Congress and congressional staff in particular. We also, over the years, have developed some expertise around on-bill financing programs for rural utilities, for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and increasingly beneficial electrification. We hold diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as core values at EESI, and our mission and vision is stated there. We are focused pretty much all the time on climate change and delivering educational resources to policymakers about climate change topics. Energy efficiency is always a good thing, and we were really pleased to see the inclusion in the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, of a small provision called the Energy Efficiency Materials Pilot Program. When I say energy efficiency is always a good thing, that's not an exaggeration. It is, and it's a good thing for multiple reasons. The first, and as someone who runs a small nonprofit, I know we're always looking for areas to save money and reinvest resources into our core mission, and energy efficiency does that by allowing us to save previously wasted money that can therefore be used to support our communities and the people who depend on us. It also increases and enhances the productivity and sustainability of our facilities and operations. We've talked a lot about indoor air quality over the last several years, and energy efficiency also does a lot to improve indoor air quality, especially when it's tied with the switching from fossil fuel combustion appliances to all electric appliances and equipment. For nonprofits in particular, we are leaders in our communities, and energy efficiency contributes to community health, wellness, and resilience. So that's a good example. If we can do the right thing, that sets a good example for others in our communities. It also is a great first step. Energy efficiency on its own is great, but it's even better when it's paired with renewable energy, battery storage, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And for ESI, there's really no better, faster, cheaper way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions than by saving energy and reducing waste. So the Energy Efficiency Materials Pilot Program, that is the provision that we'll be talking about today, along with a few others. Small provision in the IIJA, bipartisan originally, and also introduced in the House and the Senate. Congress provided $50 million over a 5-year period for the Department of Energy to make competitive grants to install what they call energy efficiency materials in nonprofits, and the cap of a grant is $200,000. The provision itself is actually very short. It doesn't go into a lot of detail. It definitely gives us some information. It doesn't give us all of the information. And so it's really important to say and to reiterate that while we're talking about this provision, the Department of Energy is still in the process of developing it. We submitted comments back in December to help inform that development, but there's a lot that we don't know. But what we do know is this. We know what a nonprofit building means. That's defined in the statute. And that's a building that's owned and operated by an organization that has 501c3 status. We know what an energy efficiency material means. So that's a product, piece of equipment, or system that results in a reduction of energy consumption. It gives a few examples of what that means. So roofs, lighting, doors, insulation, also wiring and plumbing, and heating, cooling, and ventilation, which is often the single greatest contributor to a facility's energy bill. And we know the criteria of the grants that DOE will be applying. They will be using something called performance-based criteria, and that will give priority to applications based on several factors, including energy savings achieved, cost effectiveness of the energy efficiency materials, plan for evaluation, and also the financial need of the organization itself. So that list of things that we know is great, but it's short. And so there are a lot of things that we don't know. We have been following along the Department of Energy's progress very, very closely. They're doing a great job, but they have a lot of programs to get up and running. And so while we're waiting for this program to be formally sort of scoped out and published in a notice of intent or a funding opportunity announcement, it's important that we sort of take a moment to kind of walk through some of the things we don't know yet. We provided comments on all of these points back in December. We know that the Department of Energy is taking a look at them, but where they end up with the answers to these questions, it remains to be seen. So the first thing we don't know is very important, and that is whether there will be a minimum grant amount. We know the maximum is $200,000, but what will the minimum be? Will they be making grants for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000? We don't know that yet. That's important because smaller nonprofits in particular may not be able to muster a $200,000 project. They may be able to muster one that's smaller. And so it's really important that we sort of just keep that in mind, that we don't know exactly how small these can be. We don't know if those 4 criteria I mentioned before will be weighted at all. They're listed in that order, but are there ones that DOE will look at and maybe put a little bit more emphasis on? That's an important thing, especially if, as the department is trying to ensure that these resources deliver benefits to underserved communities or under-resourced communities. We don't know how involved the application process will be. That's also important for smaller nonprofits that maybe don't have facility managers full-time or maybe don't have experience with DOE applications. This is an important issue because access to these programs is really, really important. It would be a real shame if we have all these great programs and they're just out of reach of organizations without sophisticated grant writing operations. We don't know how many DOE or applications DOE will receive. We know there are lots of nonprofits. And while this webinar is focused on ISNA members, there are lots of other types of nonprofits, whether they're religious organizations, whether they're community centers, they're animal shelters, they're food banks. You could go on and on and on. There are lots of different nonprofits. And we expect that DOE will receive more applications than it has funding for, but how many will that be? And what will that burden look like on the agency as they're trying to work through the process? That will also have an impact on these 2 final questions, which is when the grants will be awarded and when the grants will be dispersed. We're probably talking about months. We're not talking about weeks here. We know that they're still relatively early on in their process, although they've been thinking about it for a while. But we don't know when the awards will be made, and we don't know when the disbursements will be made. And that disbursement point is especially important for nonprofits that may not have the ability to carry project costs for very long. The timing of that disbursement could be really critical. Well, why are we talking about this today when there is so much unknown, when we're talking about perhaps months and months away from when grants will be awarded or dispersed? There are a couple good reasons for that. The first is that there are things that nonprofits can do today that will make it easier to muster an application when that opportunity presents itself. Some of this stuff takes a little bit of time to put together. And depending on the criteria and how those are weighted, more, larger projects, more comprehensive projects may well fare better. And even if that isn't the case, generally speaking, a little energy efficiency is good. More energy efficiency is even better. And the best of all is optimal energy efficiency. And it takes a little bit of time to put those projects together. So what could we be doing today or in the near term to prepare ourselves for when an application comes due? Or maybe an application isn't in the works. Maybe an application isn't right for a given organization at this given moment. These are still some suggestions that we've come up with to help organizations prepare, whether it's for the application or whether it's just for taking the first steps in energy efficiency generally. And the first is an easy one. Well, it's not actually easy, but it's a simple one. And that is just simply taking an accounting or an inventory of how energy is consumed in your facilities. How many light bulbs do you have? How many lighting systems do you have? What's the age of your heating system? What's the age of your cooling system? Do you have cooking equipment? When was it installed? What's the end of life situation look like? Water heating, all of the different sources of energy consumption in your building, knowing when those were installed, knowing the age of the system, and knowing the relative efficiencies of those systems are really important today, so that when you start putting a project together, you understand what you're starting with. And that leads us to the second point, which is the idea of benchmarking. And my friend Jerry will be talking with us in a moment. This is where Energy Star comes in. Energy Star Portfolio Manager is probably one of the most successful government programs of all time. It underpins a huge amount of the benchmarking that's done in the United States. It's a great resource. But benchmarking is something that requires a little bit of time to put together. You have to understand additional characteristics of your building. And the most important part of it probably is gathering 10 months of your utility bills. Understanding how your building, how your facility consumes energy over a year is a great first step or second step to understanding what the opportunities may be. And really, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, it doesn't get any better than that when it comes to a software tool to help you get started, and a free software tool at that. This is also a great time in your organization to start thinking about what success looks like. Maybe your organization already has climate goals or energy efficiency goals, but maybe it doesn't. This is a good time to start thinking about that. And if you have broader climate goals, have you thought about energy efficiency and how energy efficiency could contribute to your organization meeting those goals? This is a great segue into the idea of who the champions, who the stakeholders are in your organization. Do you have a board? Do you have key constituencies? Do you have professionals on staff who need to be, finance professionals, facility professionals, whoever it might be? Understanding who in the organization will be involved in the decision-making is really, really important. A lot of energy efficiency projects don't go forward, not because of technical reasons, but because it's difficult for an organization to make the commitment to make the investment. Hopefully the grant program will make that easier. I have a few more suggestions. The first is identifying other sources of funding to leverage. Depending on where you're located, you may have access to utility programs, you may have access to state programs, you may have access to innovative financing, whether it's provided by a utility or another entity like a green bank or another financing entity. This is where having that inventory of where your building consumes energy is really important. There may also be opportunities for tax incentives as well. Researching those potential sources of funding now will help you as you craft sort of an optimally comprehensive energy efficiency project, and understanding where different funding sources can come from. Auditing is after you get a little bit further down the line, you can begin auditing your facility. Again, your local utility is probably a good resource, or your state energy office is a good resource for this. But coming up with a list of auditors and certified energy professionals who will help you be able to actually put a project together in a way that delivers maximum cost-effective benefits. It's something that is a great sort of next to last step. And then also, a lot of nonprofits have already taken steps to improve their energy efficiency. My guess is that your peers and other organizations have lessons learned that they experienced as they completed or started their energy efficiency journey. We actually have been publishing a lot of case studies from around the country of different types of nonprofits that have undertaken energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects as well, and how those organizations have fit those together. This is a link to our website, www.eesi.org. I encourage you to check that out if you'd like to read about some of these case studies. It's also a good opportunity to plug our newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks, Climate Change Solutions. It's a great resource that provides links to all of our resources, not just about nonprofits, but also our briefings and articles and fact sheets and podcasts about a wide range of climate change topics. And everything is free and available to the public if you visit us online. So I wanted to take a few extra minutes to dive in on the secret word when it comes to energy efficiency, and that is leverage. If you're of a certain generation, you recognize Pee-wee. In every episode of Pee-wee's Playhouse, there was a secret word. Today, it's leverage. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like and how nonprofits can maximize their investment. So we're talking today about the grants, but when you think about all of the different sources of funding that might be at the disposal of a nonprofit in order to leverage, the first is the internal resources. So, not every nonprofit has cash, not every nonprofit has reserves, but that's often a good first step to look at to understand what kind of investment on its own your nonprofit could make in energy efficiency. I mentioned Energy Star before. The Energy Star for congregations is just chock full of really, really tremendous resources to help you start thinking through how to assemble projects, how to benchmark projects. It's a great resource, and again, something that is available to everyone. And I just can't recommend it enough. Depending on where you are, there may be utility rebates. So rebates for heating and cooling equipment are pretty common. Also, rebates for lighting systems are pretty common. Even things like LED exit signs, things like that, you might be surprised by how many you have in your facility. And if you're replacing older ones, every aspect of your project is a new source of savings that then can be either reinvested or leveraged into making additional investments that maybe have a different cost effectiveness horizon. I'll talk about this in just a moment, but there's some tax credits coming along that are newly available to nonprofits using what's called direct pay. Grants like the Energy Efficiency Materials Pilot Program, again, soon to be available. Whether it's a good fit for your organization remains to be seen based on what we don't know. But there may be other grants available, whether it's from a state or a local government or another community organization or maybe even from a philanthropic source. Financing is often how organizations overcome the first cost barrier. Grants and rebates are great, but they may not cover the total project cost, and you may have to think about how you spread that out over time. Innovative financing may be available to you. It's something that we've talked about in some of our case studies. We have a case study in particular looking at a nonprofit in Connecticut that was able to leverage Green Bank provided financing in some really, really interesting ways. And so that's something that you would want to take a look at. And then finally, leveraging the contractors. Contractors are the workforce of energy efficiency, and talking with them, understanding sort of what is possible. It's often really something that contractors can really contribute to. And not every community has access to the same qualified workforce, but hopefully that will be changing as these IRA and IIJ dollars continue to take effect. So when you put all of these puzzle pieces together, there are lots of potential sources, but this is why it's so important to get started early in the process, because it takes a little bit of time to do this research, to put these pieces together and figure out which ones go where, and then also how those can be applied to the project that works best for your organization. Again, we have some great resources online as well that I encourage everyone to take a look at. So I mentioned, mostly the nonprofits grants, which is a great program, but there are some other great things coming down the line. The first are these new tax incentives that have been made newly available thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act to nonprofits. Previously, a nonprofit could only take advantage of these tax incentives if there was a private company, an intermediary with a tax liability that could basically claim the credit and then offer lower project costs. Now these are available directly. We're still waiting for guidance from the IRS about how these will actually work. But sometime in the coming months or coming weeks or months, there'll be additional information. And we're talking about really generous incentives here. We're talking about a 30% rebate potentially for rooftop or community solar, for battery storage, And for energy projects in what are called energy communities, there are additional sort of bonus points that are applied as well. This is a game changer. A lot of nonprofits have been dissuaded from making these kinds of investments. And this is really, really important, especially when you also make investments in energy efficiency, makes the cost effectiveness of a solar system even better. Sort of acknowledging that nonprofits have important roles in their communities as leaders, wanted to also just take a moment to describe a few things that will be coming down the pike for individuals. So these are not available to nonprofits, but they're available to people who work with your nonprofits or who are your congregants or who you just come in contact with in your community. And so we wanted to share just a few words about this in case your organization is a resource for information about green topics in your community. The first is the energy efficient home improvement credit. This is what's called 25C. If you like to talk about the Internal Revenue Code, it's a really generous incentive for heat pumps, water heaters, and building envelope improvements. And now these are, rather than lifetime credits, they're annual credits, which is a really tremendous improvement over what was previously available. There will also be some rebate programs coming out for energy efficiency. These will be moving through the state energy offices where you live. And there's still a lot of work to be done about how the Department of Energy will implement these. But there's almost $9 billion of resources coming down the line for residential energy efficiency and electrification improvements. And then in the electric vehicle tax credits, previously only for new, now higher levels, and also a tax incentive for used vehicles, which is really exciting. We'll make these slides available, of course, and so this is just a list of some of our resources. Often, many of these resources deal specifically with nonprofits. The why energy efficiency is important nonprofits might be a great one to start with if you're new to thinking about this. And then there's some others, those ones that are starred there, some really great, some of our more recent case studies about how nonprofits have undertaken these projects. Some great DOE resources as well. And then if you're interested in learning more about the other IRA incentives, this is a link to our article from, I think, last September that kind of walk through the different tax incentives and rebate programs that will be coming out from the IRS at some point. With that, I'll close things up. My contact information. I hope everyone feels welcome to give me a ring. You're also welcome to give, or I volunteer Miguel and Molly to also get emails and phone calls too. I'll happily wrap up there and turn it over to back to you, Safet, and then to Jerry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Very informative overview of the program, the pilot program, and the ways in which communities can prepare for it before the actual rollout of the grant application process. So very much appreciate that and appreciate the incredible work that you're doing with your team. And so we're thankful for your sharing this information. We're going to do some questions and answers at the end of this, but I'd like to remind everybody to please put your questions in the chat, and we will share them with the panelists. If you have a specific panelist that you would like to share a question with, please do put it in the chat. And at the end of, we have about 10-15 minutes at the end of this webinar that will be focused on Q&A. Also like to mention that as it seems that there's a lot to unpack here and a lot of work to be done, but you know, every journey begins with a couple of first steps. And so one of the things that the ISNA Green Initiatives Committee that works on these issues for ISNA, Southside North America, regarding environmental advocacy and sharing information, knowledge building up within the community, awareness and understanding, is to begin, if you have not done so already, to set up a green team within your community, sort of to look at ways in which you are currently utilizing energy and work towards efficiencies. They become then the point person, and you don't need to be an expert to be a member of the green team. You need to be someone who is willing and able to do some basic research, and organizations and institutions like EESI provide ways in which it can happen and allow you to access that information in an easy way. But you need to begin at the first step. You need to say, we as an organization are committed to this work. We are committed to environmental stewardship, which is both a religious mandate and a necessity for our collective existence on this planet going forward. And then become empowered, begin the research, and ISNA will help you along the way. We'll put in the chat connections to our webpage and the ISNA Green Initiatives page within that webpage with regard to information, how you can move in this direction in a efficient and effective way. Our next presenter, we're very happy to have with us a longtime friend, and we've done a lot of work together with the ISNA Green Initiatives Committee on the Energy Star program, which I know he's going to share about, so I'm not going to give it away with regard to the Muslim community. And that's our good friend Jerry Lawson, the national manager of the Energy Star program, which is for small businesses and congregations of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and a person that has continuously advocated on behalf of and supported providing information to small nonprofits and specifically religious nonprofits as to how they can better access governmental programs and help us to help ourselves to be able to have a better understanding, a snapshot of where we are environmentally speaking in terms of energy consumption and ways in which we can turn back the cost of paying for the energy consumption, as well as making a positive improvement on the way in which we interact as a community with the environment. Without further ado, our dear friend Jerry Case.
Thank you, Safet. Is my screen showing properly?
Not yet.
Okay, we'll try again. How about that?
Perfect. EPA resources for ISNA.
All right.
First slide is there.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, first, I want to also commend my friends and colleagues at EESI. I've been depending on them for the best understanding and up-to-date information on the Infrastructure Reduction Act. We've got a great website and e-newsletter, so I recommend that. Let's see. Safet, I'm not sure my slides advanced. Did it?
We're still on the first slide, Jerry.
Okay. Same problem as earlier.
Maybe we can try to share them. Miguel, if you have the opportunity, if he stops to share, would you be able to share it, Miguel? I know there's some technological problems.
Sure, I can do that.
So, Jerry, if it's okay, I would ask that you stop sharing your screen, and Miguel, if you could kindly share the screen. And then, Jerry, I think you can put your camera on.
Okay. As I said, I'm in an unusual location to be doing this and having trouble with screens.
You're not alone with the challenges of technology these days. But maybe if you can, Miguel, can you share when he's sharing or no?
I can do that now.
Okay, Jerry, Miguel has just shared the second page of your slideshow. So if you want to put your camera on, if you're in a position to do so, you can, or you just talk your way through it. He's on slide 2. See all EPA resources for congregations.
Well, I had my camera on and it wasn't working either.
That's fine.
If I can just say advance the slides, please, and we'll work it that way. Is that okay?
That works fine.
Okay. On this slide, the title is linked. You'll receive all the slides, and there are 18 some programs across EPA that are of interest and value to the faith community. Things like the Safer Choice program for less toxic, cleaner products for cleaning the worship facility. We have the Guide to Purchasing Green Power. That's the Green Power Partnership for solar. The Environmental Justice Screen to look at EJ issues in your zip code. The Pollinator Protection Program, Saving the Rain, and some others I'll show you in a moment. Next slide, please. Are we there? I can't see.
Sure, it
Yeah.
says Energy Star for small business congregations.
Okay, all right. Well, quick comment. Energy Star has been around for over 30 years, and I've been able to work with the faith community for most of the time. What we have learned over the decades is that most commercial buildings are wasting or could save about 30% of the energy they're paying for. And of course, in a congregation, this is money that can go back to the ministry, to the mission, to the reasons you congregate. So there's some resources to be found in energy efficiency, as Dan articulated. Energy Star provides tools and training and technical support for energy and water efficiency as well. We have a tool I'll talk about for creating your baseline and tracking your greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll talk about some recognition for excellence. Next, please. We partnered with ISNA to create, and they were the first to do a highly customized and co-branded edition of the Action Workbook for worship facilities. And in a very comfortable language for your faith community, we talk about energy management in terms of making a commitment, assessing your energy performance, setting goals, creating an action plan, implementing, evaluating progress, and recognizing achievements, which we think is important. Next slide, please. And another part of our partnership with ISNA was co-branding and customizing what we call a treasure map. It's about 7 pages, pretty densely populated with facts and tips and links about these general areas of facility management, lighting, the building envelope, that is your doors, windows, roof, walls around the conditioned space, water inside the heated and hot and cold water savings, exterior water savings, water reduction and recycling for ablution and other all your inside water uses, heating, ventilation, air conditioning savings, and the ever-growing office equipment and plug load that we need to work on. And then, as most faith communities have a family room or a kitchen and food service, we have special information and action items for each of these areas. And you can, when we're done, Asafat can probably tell you the best way to get the ISNA edition of both the Action Workbook and this treasure map. The next, please. I think most of the American public, 95% of the American public know the blue and white label because of the thousands of types of Energy Star products with billions of models out there for general areas of appliances, electronics, kitchen, commercial food service, a lot of products for the home and office, business. When you're looking at the labeled products, also you'll find there are videos and podcasts you can link to, purchasing guides and calculators. Next, please. One of the things we have learned over the years working with our partners are that friendly competitions are a good way to engage the members of the congregation. A competition across town with the interfaith community or within the congregation, people in their homes and businesses, you can set up a friendly competition. You can now benchmark residences on the single family home in Portfolio Manager, as well as commercial buildings. And next slide, please. Speaking of Portfolio Manager, this is the free online tool for creating the baseline for your facility, be it the house of worship, your home, your business. We call this benchmarking to get started. Next, please. By putting 12 months of your electric billing data, and you can also track water use, you can track solid materials, waste and recycling, but fundamentally it's for tracking and scoring your energy use. It's assessing the whole building, any kind of commercial building, including your worship facility. You can track green power. You can, through programming, you can decide who to share your data with. Otherwise, it's private. We at EPA don't see your data unless you need help. Then we can work with you if you help us get in. Most importantly, you're tracking the changes over time as you see improvements in your efficiency, whether it's energy, water, or your greenhouse gas emissions. From your baseline, you can see the progress every month that you're updating your data. There are regular reports programmed in, or you can create custom reports. And it is within Portfolio Manager that you can apply for Energy Star certification, as we'll see in a moment. Next, please. So one of the important things about Portfolio Manager is, unlike tracking your utility bills on your own spreadsheet, is that Portfolio Manager goes into EPA's database of what your electric utility for your zip code is reporting to EPA for the greenhouse gas emissions per kilowatt hour. Portfolio Manager will, for you, do the calculations to show you the greenhouse gas emissions for your house of worship or other facility. Again, you can track your water use if you choose, your waste materials, and your building will be scored. Here again, the greenhouse gas emissions are a function of the information reported to EPA times your usage. Next slide, please. Of interest to Islamic centers are that getting close to 30 now major cities, including Northern Virginia, for example, are requiring the larger buildings to benchmark in Portfolio Manager. This is not something that EPA requires, but these are local mandates that are related to the cities trying to do better. Next, please. So here's a quick screenshot at one of the links we'll provide how you can set up your Portfolio Manager account. And the point is, next slide, please. Portfolio Manager will rank your house of worship or your commercial building on a 1 to 100 scale, 62, for example, if you're just starting out. But as one of your congregations has done, it's achieved a 75 or higher and qualified for Portfolio Manager, for Energy Star certification. Next slide, please. So we're very proud of our partner, the Islamic Center of Evansville, Indiana, which is scored above a 75. They went through the verification process to ensure that the numbers are correct and that the air quality is good, that the lighting levels are good. And yes, this is an Energy Star certified house of worship. The green team of ISNA worked with a number of Islamic centers in 2020. They are still working with them. We have done webinars. We will do more webinars with the green team to help the Islamic centers and the mosques continue to make progress. And back to earlier slides, it's that ISNA co-branded customized treasure map and the action workbook are all the tools and information that the facilities need to achieve certification. Next slide, please. Another great tool, this is not Energy Star, it's an EPA tool. It's called Supporting Healthy Houses of Worship, and it helps you assess a risk in the house of worship. Next slide, please. It's going to help you look. It has one-page overviews and tools for looking at things like asthma and those triggers. If you have an urban facility, buses and vehicle idling could be issues. What about the drinking water in the facility? We're increasingly having extreme heat events to be concerned with. Indoor air is always of interest and concern. Mold and moisture, pesticides and pest management, other issues. So here at the bottom of the page is a link to download the Healthy Houses of Worship document. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay. On the final slide, you see my email address. We encourage individual congregations to join Energy Star, although ISNA is a partner. We're not worried about double counting organizations because it's the benchmarking. That is what we count. We track the pollution prevention and the energy savings within portfolio manager benchmarking. So we're happy for every congregation that's affiliated with ISNA to become an Energy Star partner. And with that, I will be done and will join into answering questions.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for that snapshot and that wonderful overview of the EPA's Energy Star program, and specifically the portfolio manager. As a reminder, anyone who registered for this webinar will receive both slide decks as well as the resources that have been shared. In addition to that, within the very near future, ISNA will have this recording of the webinar posted on our website, as well as the resource pages and the slide decks as well. So if you're watching and you have not registered or watched this recording through some other means, once again, the ISNA website will have that information, but we will share it with all those who have registered for the webinar. A lot has been covered, and this is sort of just an overview and a snapshot. This is one of several webinars that ISNA is organizing or co-organizing with our interfaith partners to provide information that is accessible, clear to our communities with regard to ways in which they can increase their energy efficiency, access governmental funding for these programs. I'd like to begin with a couple of questions that I received and I'll sort of direct them in back and forth between Jerry and Dan. Jerry, it seems that there is the portfolio manager, and this can go to Dan as well. The portfolio manager, once someone has entered the information into there with regard to energy tracking and so on, will that be sufficient documentation, or is it to meet the DOE requirements for the pilot project in terms of providing the documentation necessary for the grant application and the follow-up? Is that sufficient, or is there additional documentation that may be required? And what would be the experience of time required to enter to collect and enter the information based upon experience in this regard, Jerry? So both of you can sort of chime in on that question.
Okay, Dan may know more. I'm not sure we know yet what DOE will require. I think there's a good possibility that portfolio manager will be adequate or very close to what DOE is requiring. I will put in the chat a link to the data collection worksheet. It's for different facility types, including worship facilities. There's a fairly limited amount of data required to get the Energy Star score and to be benchmarking. So it's good to get the data collection worksheet. You can download it as a PDF or Word doc and gather your data before you start to benchmark so that you've got it at hand. And working with Safet, we'll be happy to have a future webinar. One of the things we've done in the past is using a generic data collection worksheet. We demonstrate doing data entry and setting up your account. So that's something we could do in the future.
I think
That's-
Jerry's, oh, go ahead, stop it, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. That's in the plans. Please go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, I think Jerry's right. I don't think we know yet exactly sort of what will sort of satisfy the requirements of the application. But going back to the criteria I talked about on one of my slides, there are 4 criteria that are named specifically: energy savings achieved, cost effectiveness of the use of energy efficiency materials, and plan for evaluation, measurement, and verification. The 4th one is financial need. But for those first 3, benchmarking of one form or another is really important in order to document savings achieved, the cost effectiveness, and the plan for measurement. So I think benchmarking and really portfolio manager, especially any, the slide included some, that example project in Indiana. It's really exciting. Portfolio manager is really about as good as it gets. And it all kind of comes back down to that inventory and the 12 months of energy savings. Benchmarking is really part of the project. And so it's not, I would encourage people not to think of it as something that's standalone or that's sort of ancillary or auxiliary. It's really part of the program. It's really part of the energy efficiency project. Regardless of what form it takes, it's really integral to the planning of the project. And then, to Jerry's point, wanting to make sure that people get, recognition for the good projects. It's really hard to do that without understanding where you're starting from.
Thank you for that. Specific question to you, Dan. What are 3 or 4, is sort of a follow-on to this, tips that you would offer someone who's thinking about performing an energy efficient retrofit for their facility? And once again, I want to highlight that ISNA Green Initiatives team really champions the idea of designating specific individuals who have the willingness and the commitment. The knowledge base can be developed through all the different resources we're talking about, and it's actually part of the process of learning. But a Green Initiatives team that has the responsibility by the board or the directors of the organization to report to them and to share the information that they've collected. And it can consist of folks of all shapes, sizes, educational backgrounds, etc. It doesn't require expertise per se, because there are a lot of tools that are out there. But you can share some tips, Dan. I appreciate it.
That is a great tip. I mean, ultimately, these projects are implemented by people. People need information to make decisions. And having a diverse set of folks across your organization with different interests. The nice thing about energy efficiency is it delivers multiple benefits. So it will make your CFO happy, it will make your facilities people happy, it will make the people who use your facilities happier, they'll be comfortable. It really does kind of benefit everybody across the organization. So that's definitely one tip. I think going through and really identifying the sources of energy consumption in your building, that can start with a walkthrough. I know in a previous job, I participated in several walkthroughs with projects that I financed or provided rebates or grants for. And it's amazing what you don't know about your building. And, getting in there, getting into those spaces, really getting in and seeing the equipment, really, I think it's a great way to kind of get familiar with what the opportunities are. Counting light bulbs, it sounds like that's, sort of a silly thing to suggest, but your lighting load is unless you've completely moved over to LEDs, it's probably a significant source of savings that can be leveraged. So I would say that would be a big one. I think also talking with folks across ISNA, talking with folks across the interfaith community, talking with other nonprofits in your communities that have undertaken these projects. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. It's sort of one of those things where each project is unique, but it's also kind of the same. It requires the same steps. It requires the same research. And so I would definitely encourage you or organizations to reach out to peers to do that. And then also, I think my last tip would be to really research what's available from your utility. Your utility is where you get your electricity from, maybe where you get your other fuels from. And there are probably resources that are available to your nonprofit. Some of them may be financial resources, like a rebate or maybe a financing program. Some of it may be help finding a contractor or an auditor who meets certification requirements. There also may be non-financial incentives, whether they're information or haul-away programs or other things that might be helpful. But I would say those would be my, including yours, those would be my other 3 big tips.
Thank you for that. When we speak about replacement of HVAC systems and appliances, maybe Jerry would like to also chime in on this. The Energy Star resources that you shared in your slide, is that a go-to place for these types of system replacements? Because that's, especially the HVAC systems, I think in a lot of the smaller physical facilities and buildings of nonprofits are a major source of energy consumption, but also energy loss, the way that they've been constructed over the years. Is Energy Star sort of a go-to place for that? And would that be acceptable by the DOE as they make an assessment of existing inventory of equipment and then which types of equipment they're going to replace?
Well, it's all so integrated. You certainly want to have the best level of energy efficiency you can before you look at sizing a new HVAC system. And not to get too far afield here, but if you put in a highly efficient new HVAC system, but your building is inefficient, it's going to not achieve what it can. On the other hand, if you come back behind a highly efficient system and increase the efficiency of your building, your system will be oversized in all likelihood. And things will happen like you will cool down the space before you adequately remove the humidity. So that's not good. And you'll also be paying to run a larger system than necessary, and you will have paid to put in a larger system than necessary. So back to Dan saying energy efficiency is always good, and you want to find the sort of the highest cost-effective level of efficiency possible. Then is the time to look at sizing HVAC, a new boiler, solar, any kind of major new equipment. Now, at the Energy Star Products website, we list all the Energy Star certified heat pumps, air conditioners, all of that, all HVAC equipment. There are zip code based product finders. We help you find rebates as well. But then for, that's just about the new product. You really want to look to the ISNA customized treasure map and the ISNA customized action workbook for more detail and thoughts and strategies on HVAC. And then, of course, you're working with your contractor. Your mosque, your center may have a contractor of longstanding. You want to talk with them, meet with them, and be sure they understand your priorities, and that they're not just going to bring in the a straight tonnage replacement for anything they've taken out. And I've talked to contractors who understand that, well, we're not as efficient as we can be, but we're going to be working on that even as we put in a new HVAC system. So they might, to some percentage, go along with downsizing, understanding that you're going to be working to catch up with efficiency. So it takes some thought and collaboration with everyone involved.
And fortunately, through the various resources provided in terms of the inventory listing, as well as the checklists that are provided through the EPA resource page, this can be made a lot easier for people to follow and to work on.
Yeah.
Once again, closing remarks for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to share some information about an upcoming webinar. Dan?
Well, I will use my 30 seconds to just build on something that Jerry said. And, imagine you're putting this project together. It's comprehensive. It's heating, it's cooling, it's building envelope. Great. You implement it. One of the great things about Energy Star is it covers so many different products. And so thinking about, when you're replacing computer monitors, refrigerators, things that may be not part of the comprehensive project we're talking about today, Energy Star is a great resource for all of those other energy consuming devices. That plug load that Jerry mentioned during his presentation, it's an increasing part of a building's energy consumption, and Energy Star can really help with that, even outside the context of a significant grant application. So I'll just thank Jerry and thank EPA and thank you, Safet, and thank you, ISNA, and everyone who joined us today. It was really nice to get a chance to share this information, and I hope we'll have opportunities to work together later.
Wonderful. Jerry? Definitely looking forward to it.
I'm just going to put one more link in the chat. It's to our training page, at which there are live webinars. All of our webinars are recorded, and it's not just energy efficiency. We have our colleagues at WaterSense come in and do things, other EPA programs. There are YouTube video links. There are PDF fact sheets that can be downloaded. There are a couple of really great ones on how to get started with Portfolio Manager. There's also a link on the lower left to our help desk. You can go there, and at the help desk URL, there are some FAQs, but also at the bottom, a link where you can submit a question, a little form to submit a question. And our help desk is very highly rated by users, so I would recommend it.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Before closing out, I'm going to I would like to remind everyone, one of the way, God willing, we'll be able to work together to put this grant applications through, and we'll have a series of webinars with regard both to this program as well as other programs. And I'll share a webinar that we're having actually on February 21st with our interfaith partners at IPL and others, including EESI and the EPA, with regard to specifically the benchmarking as a follow-up to this webinar. So we're looking forward to your participation in that. But that being said, we pray, God willing, you will get some of you, those who are online, will be able to receive the grant funds associated with this program. In order to actually receive the funds, you need to have what's called an entity number. And there's a website at the United States government called sam.gov. They basically, you need to be in the system in order to receive the grant funds. And I've been told variously by different folks that sometimes there is a long waiting list and waiting time to get onto that. So if you don't already have a registration number, what they call the entity number, through sam.gov, you can apply for that separately from this grant, but it will allow you in the future to be able to access this grant or other grants if they are awarded to you. So please do take the opportunity to do so. Now, I'd just like to share an upcoming webinar. Can you all see that online or no?
Yes. Okay.
So on February 21st, we're joining together with various faith-based partners and IPL, Interfaith Power and Light, to have a specific webinar more on the details of benchmarking and providing details to this webinar as a follow-up. So this was an overview. Next one will be a much more detailed and one of a series of webinars which will be working to provide information and resources to our communities and congregations. We have over 3,000 mosques, or approaching 3,000 mosques nationwide, as well as 600 plus Islamic schools, full-time Muslim parochial schools. Many of them are owned and operated by the communities Muslim communities that they serve. And very much this is an opportunity for those congregations to find ways in which they can allocate the limited resources that they have towards the mission, as was mentioned before, by reducing the cost of energy consumption and at the same time making our lives a mercy and a blessing for the earth. For the verse of the Quran concludes, that the servants of the merciful are those who walk softly or gently upon the earth. And that means reducing our carbon footprint by increasing our spiritual footprint, and proper facilities management when it comes to energy efficiency is a good way to do that. Thank you again to our panelists for presenting. Thank you to Dan and his wonderful team, Miguel and Molly. Thank you to Sister Tabassum Ahmed from our ISNA headquarters, who was behind the scenes making all this happen. Thank you, Jerry Lawson, for your presentation, and looking forward to seeing you on February 21st at the webinar, 1 p.m. God bless, stay safe, be green. Assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings.